The fire was still burning when they found the last heir of the Blackwood family. No one could say how long the house had been awake that night, only that the snow around it had melted in a perfect circle, as if the earth itself refused to touch its walls. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from tonight? The valleys are dark, the windows are listening, and every story sounds different depending on the distance between you and the thing that's calling. Now lean closer. This isn't a legend, or at least it didn't begin as one. It began in Austria, in the year 1900, when the Blackwood family still believed their blood could be contained. The Blackwood estate stood at the edge of the Salzkammergut forest, where the mist never fully lifted and the birch trees grew close enough to choke out the light. The house was older than the century itself, older, some said, than the empire that claimed it. Its stones were taken from a ruined monastery, its foundations laid over a stream that ran black in the moonlight. Villagers who lived in the valley below had a name for that stream, Der Flutschfluss, the cursed river. No one could recall the first Blackwood to arrive in Austria. The records from England were vague, and the name itself, foreign, heavy with foreign guilt, seemed to appear suddenly in the tax rolls around 1811, attached to the acquisition of a vast tract of forest land once belonging to a Benedictine order. The old abbot who signed the deed died within the year. His successor, a timid man of letters, wrote only that the Lord's work has been done, but not all in light. By the turn of the 20th century, the estate belonged to Baron Heinrich Blackwood, a man of 38 with the face of one who had never known rest. He rarely appeared in daylight, and when he did, he wore dark spectacles that reflected the world but revealed nothing of his eyes. His servants, all foreigners, spoke in whispers and lit candles long before dusk. The people of Hallstatt spoke of sounds from the forest at night, the cries of children, the tolling of bells though no church stood near, and the faint scent of burning myrrh carried down the hills. Shepherds who strayed too close to the property returned silent and pale, with no memory of what they had seen. One of them, a boy of 14, died within the week, clutching a rosary that had turned black in his hand. Baron Heinrich did not attend the funeral. In the drawing-room of Blackwood Hall, the Baron kept a portrait of his ancestor, Elias Blackwood, painted in 1798. The man's eyes, deep and almost luminous, seemed to follow the viewer across the room. A faint crack had split the canvas across the heart, and beneath the varnish, the painter's signature had been scoured away. Yet on certain nights, when the wind rose from the woods, servants swore the portrait's expression changed, its mouth curving faintly as though in mockery. It was during one such night, in the winter of 1901, that a guest arrived unannounced, Dr. Clara Weiss, a scholar from Vienna who had written to the Baron regarding her research into medieval occult manuscripts. She had discovered, in a Jesuit archive, mention of a text called Liber Obscura, a grimoire believed to have passed into the hands of an English family exiled to Austria a century prior. The name on the margin, E. Blackwood. The Baron, upon reading her letter, had responded with unexpected haste. "Come to the estate at once. The matter is of great importance to both our lines." When Clara arrived, the gates were open though no one stood to greet her. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and iron. Inside, the hall was vast and silent. Paintings of unfamiliar saints lined the corridor, each with eyes too wide, their halos dimmed with soot. In the distance, the low hum of a pipe organ drifted from the west wing, though no one was at the keys. "Dr. Weiss," a voice said behind her. She turned. Baron Heinrich was taller than she expected, his frame angular, his hair silver though his face was youthful. He wore a long black coat and gloves despite the heat from the hearth. His smile was measured, almost learned. "You are welcome in my home, but you must not stay beyond the new moon." Clara nodded, uncertain of his meaning. She followed him into the library, a vaulted chamber lined with books whose spines bore no titles. The air was thick with candle smoke. Upon a long oak table lay several bound manuscripts, their leather warped and darkened. One, open before the Baron, bore the mark she had seen in the Jesuit archive, a circle of black ink enclosing a sigil that pulsed faintly under the flame. "You know this symbol," Heinrich said. Clara hesitated. "It's said to be of English origin. Some scholars connect it to pre-Reformation heresies, those who sought to merge faith with invocation." The Baron's lips twitched. "Invocation, yes, though not of the divine." He pushed the book toward her. The page was written in Latin so old it seemed almost musical. She recognized fragments of the litany, invocations of Umbri, shadows that dwelt between breath and reflection. Yet one line had been added in a hand unlike the rest. Blackwood testator. The flesh endures, the soul must be bound. Clara looked up. This was written by your ancestor?" Heinrich's eyes reflected the flame. "By more than one of them." As she studied him, the firelight caught something on his wrist, a mark, faint but deliberate, matching the sigil in the book. He saw her notice and drew his sleeve down swiftly. "You came seeking knowledge," he said, "but knowledge has a price. Tell me, Dr. Weiss, do you believe a soul can be made eternal?" Clara swallowed. "I believe men have died trying to prove it." He smiled, not in amusement but recognition. "Then you already understand the curse of my house." From somewhere deep within the estate came a sudden sound, a single note from the organ, long and low, vibrating through the floorboards. The Baron's expression hardened. "Do not be alarmed. The house remembers its dead." She might have believed him mad then, had she not seen the candle flames flicker inward, as though drawn toward a breath that came from beneath the earth. That night, Clara was given a guest chamber in the east wing. The walls were damp, the windows barred. She found, upon the writing desk, an old letter addressed to no one. Its ink had faded, but she could make out the final line. "The blood will not die. It listens. It waits." Outside, the woods murmured like a living thing. As the moon sank behind the ridge, a bell tolled once from the chapel, though no one had entered it for decades. Clara rose from her bed, heart pounding, and went to the window. In the courtyard below, she saw the Baron walking barefoot across the snow, carrying a candle whose flame burned blue. Behind him, faintly, shadows followed that were not his own. The morning after Clara Weiss's arrival broke cold and colourless. The fog lay thick over the Blackwood estate, swallowing the sun before it reached the valley. From her chamber window, Clara could see the faint outline of the family chapel, its roof collapsed, its crucifix blackened by time. A murder of crows circled above it in slow, uneven spirals. She dressed and made her way down to the library, but the Baron was not there. Instead, a servant, a small man with a scar across his temple, was dusting the high shelves. He did not look up when she entered. "Where is the master?" she asked. The man's hand froze on the shelf. "In the chapel," he murmured, his accent thick, Slavic. "He goes there every dawn." Clara frowned. "That ruin? It's hardly safe." The servant's eyes flicked toward her, pale and afraid. "It is not the ruin you should fear, Fräulein. It is what sleeps beneath it." Before she could question him, he left the room, moving quickly and without sound. The door closed behind him with a hollow echo. Clara turned her attention to the manuscripts once more. The open page she had studied the previous night was gone. In its place lay a different book, smaller, bound in red leather. A thin ribbon marked a passage halfway through. It was written in the same ancient Latin, but with marginal notes in German. She read slowly, her breath catching at certain phrases. "The blood may serve as vessel, the body as gate." Thus through the chosen line shall the shadow take form. The marginal note, in a sharper hand, read, "Performed thrice only in the known world, once in Egypt, once in Prague, and once in England, 1798. Clara closed the book, her pulse quickening. 1798, the date of Elias Blackwood's portrait. She left the library and followed the corridor that led toward the chapel. The air grew colder as she descended a narrow staircase lined with portraits of grim-faced ancestors. Some of the frames were empty, as though the canvas had been removed or fled. The scent of myrrh, faint but persistent, grew stronger. When she reached the chapel door, she paused. It hung half open, the hinges crusted with rust. Inside, the pews were collapsed into piles of worm-eaten wood. The altar was cracked, its marble veined with soot. But at the far end, in a shaft of grey light, knelt Baron Heinrich. He did not move when she entered. His coat was laid beside him, and in his hands he held a chalice of dark glass. The air around him shimmered faintly, as though with heat. Beneath his breath she heard a rhythm, not words, but sounds shaped into cadence, low and resonant. When he lifted the chalice, the light in the room dimmed. "Baron," she said quietly, "I didn't mean to intrude." He turned his head slowly. His eyes, behind the dark lenses, seemed almost translucent. "You could not intrude if you were called." "I wasn't called," she said. "Not here." He smiled faintly. "And yet you came." She stepped closer. "You believe this ritual, whatever it is, connects to your family's curse?" Heinrich rose, still holding the chalice. "Curse," he repeated. "A curse is only a blessing misunderstood." He walked toward her. Within the cup, the liquid was not wine but something thicker, glinting faintly blue in the pale light. He stopped before her and tilted it so she could see her reflection. For a moment she thought the surface showed only her face. Then another face, faint and flickering, appeared behind hers. A woman's face, pale and eyeless, lips moving in silent words. Clara stumbled back. "What is that?" "The first of us," Heinrich said softly. "She who made the pact. Her name is not to be spoken, but her shadow endures. It is passed through blood, through vow, through the sacrament of remembrance." "You mean this entity, lives through your bloodline?" Heinrich's voice lowered to a whisper. "Lives is not the word. It waits." He set the chalice upon the broken altar. As he did, the air shifted, an unseen wind stirring the dust. The crows outside screamed once, a harsh, unified cry. Heinrich flinched, as though struck. "The house is restless today," he said. "It feels your presence." Clara's gaze moved to the chalice again. "If this thing waits in your blood, then it could end with you." Heinrich gave a bitter laugh. "It should have, years ago. But the Blackwood line does not end. We have tried. God knows we have tried." He turned to the altar, pressing his palm to the stone. Beneath his hand, the surface glowed faintly red, as though something beneath it responded to his touch. "I need your help, Dr. Weiss," he said. "You have studied these rites. You know the languages they hid their truths in. There is a final invocation, one that can sever the bond. I have searched a lifetime for it." Clara hesitated. If such a rite exists, it would not come without cost. He looked over his shoulder. "You think I fear the price? The Blackwoods have paid it for 2 centuries. He stepped aside and gestured toward the altar. Beneath this chapel lies what remains of the first vessel, the bones of Elias Blackwood's wife. She was the first to carry the mark, the first to speak the words that brought the shadow into this world. I keep her here, because her presence anchors what little control remains. Clara felt a chill creep up her spine. "You mean she's buried here?" "Not buried," Heinrich said softly. "Bound." He knelt again and touched the floor. The stone shifted under his fingers with a faint grinding sound, and a section of the altar slid aside, revealing a narrow stairway leading down into darkness. The air that rose from it was colder than the winter outside, thick with the scent of iron and decay. "Come," he said. "You must see." Clara hesitated on the threshold. "Why show me this?" "Because," Heinrich said, looking up at her, "you are part of it now. You opened the book." She froze. "I didn't. The Liber Obscura marks all who read from it. You saw the seal. You spoke the words aloud, even if you did not know their meaning. It has heard you. It will not forget." The candle at the altar guttered and went out. From below, a faint whisper rose, soft, rhythmic, like breathing through water. Clara took a step back. "Baron." He caught her wrist, his grip cold as stone. "There is no leaving now," he said quietly. "Not until the blood is free, or we are consumed." From below came a faint knock, 3 slow, deliberate raps against the stone. Then the whisper became a voice. "Heinrich, you promised me the dawn." The Baron went rigid. The chalice on the altar trembled, its contents rippling though no hand touched it. Clara's mind reeled. The voice had come from beneath them, from the stairway leading into the dark. Heinrich released her wrist. "You must go," he said hoarsely, "before it wakes." But as Clara turned toward the door, the stone beneath her feet began to pulse, slowly like a heartbeat. The chapel filled with the faint scent of roses and rot, and from the stairway a single pale hand began to rise. The pale hand grasped the edge of the stairwell, fingers thin as bone, nails blackened like old ivory. Clara froze. The Baron stumbled backward, eyes wide, whispering words she did not understand. The air in the chapel thickened, pressing against her chest. From below came the sound of slow, deliberate breathing, a rhythm older than speech. The hand tightened its grip, pulling upward, revealing the curve of an arm wrapped in shreds of burial silk. Clara whispered, "It's her." Heinrich nodded once. His face was grey. "The first vessel," he said. "She wakes when the blood is stirred." The voice rose again, closer now. "Heinrich, my dawn," and the hand twitched as if beckoning. With sudden force, Heinrich seized the chalice and hurled it into the stairwell. The moment it shattered, a scream erupted, high, piercing, neither human nor wholly inhuman. The hand withdrew. The floor quaked once, then fell still. Silence. Clara stared at the Baron, her pulse hammering. What was that? Heinrich sank to his knees. "A warning," he said softly. "She knows you are here." Clara backed toward the door. "Then I should leave." He looked up at her, despair shadowing his face. "You can't. The house has taken your scent." Outside, the crows began to circle again, their cries echoing through the mist. The altar stone sealed itself with a dull thud, leaving no trace of the stairway beneath. And far below, in the dark, something whispered her name. "Clara!" By evening, the fog had thickened into a wall that swallowed the estate whole. Candles burned dimly in the corridors, their flames bowing toward unseen draughts. Clara had not seen the Baron since the chapel. He had vanished somewhere in the west wing, leaving her alone among the whispering halls. The servants avoided her eyes. When she asked for the way back to the library, they crossed themselves and muttered only one phrase, "Not after sundown." Ignoring their warnings, she returned to the upper floor. The library door stood ajar, but inside it was empty. The manuscripts were gone, every one of them. In their place, on the oak table, lay a single object, an oval mirror framed in black wood, its surface covered with a white shroud. Her hand trembled as she reached for the cloth. Beneath it, the mirror's glass was smooth, unblemished, yet no reflection met her gaze. Only darkness. She leaned closer. The surface rippled faintly, like water disturbed by breath. Then she saw movement. Not her own, but another figure, standing just behind her shoulder in the reflection. A woman in tattered silk, her head slightly tilted, her eyes two hollow wells of light. Clara spun around. The room was empty. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She turned back to the mirror. The woman was still there, closer now, her lips parted in a slow, deliberate smile. From the doorway came the Baron's voice, low and strained. "Do not look at her." He crossed the room swiftly and covered the glass again with the shroud. The darkness within it shivered once and went still. Clara's breath shook. "She's here, isn't she?" "She never left," Heinrich said quietly. "The mirror was her last tether, my ancestor's gift, or his punishment. What does she want?" He hesitated. "Not to haunt, to return." He looked at Clara then, and in his gaze was both fear and resignation. "She needs a living vessel." The candles guttered. Somewhere deep in the estate, the organ began to play on its own, low, mournful chords echoing through the walls. Heinrich turned toward the sound. "It begins again." As he left the room, Clara looked once more at the shrouded mirror. Beneath the cloth, faintly, something pressed outward, as if a face were forming beneath the veil. "Clara," came the whisper, soft as silk. "Let me see you." The melody wound through the corridors like a living pulse, deep, trembling notes that rose and fell with the rhythm of breath. Clara followed the sound, the hem of her dress brushing against the cold stone. Every turn of the corridor seemed to lead her deeper into the house's ribs. When she reached the music room, the organ was playing itself. Its keys moved in steady patterns, though no hands touched them. The air shimmered with dust and candle smoke. She stood at the doorway, transfixed. Each note vibrated through the floorboards, rattling her bones. The sound was more than music. It was language, something beneath words, older and hungrier. Then she saw them. Behind the organ, half-shadowed, stood figures, faint, translucent, like mist shaped into men and women. Their faces were stretched in silence, their eyes fixed upon her. Each wore the Blackwood crest upon their chest. Clara whispered, "The ancestors!" One of them, a man whose face she recognized from the portraits, stepped forward. His mouth opened, and from it came the same voice that had whispered her name in the chapel. "You have read the book. You carry its echo." Clara's hand went to her chest. "What do you want from me?" "Release." The organ struck a dissonant chord. The spirits flickered, their forms blurring. Then, all at once, the candles went out. Darkness swallowed the room. A faint hand brushed Clara's shoulder, cold, feather-light. She turned, and the Baron stood there, his face pale with dread. "You shouldn't have come here," he said. "They hear you now." He grasped her arm and pulled her from the room. Behind them, the organ continued to play, faster now, like a heartbeat approaching collapse. As they fled down the hall, Clara looked back once. Through the half-open door, she saw the mirror again, its shroud gone, and in its surface, dozens of faces pressed against the glass, whispering in one voice. "The blood remembers." By dawn, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing the twisted silhouettes of the forest beyond the gates. Clara had not slept. The house itself seemed to breathe. The walls exhaled a faint chill, and the floorboards creaked with a rhythm too deliberate to be random. Somewhere above her, the organ groaned in its sleep. The Baron had withdrawn to his study before morning. When Clara entered, she found him seated at a heavy desk, his hands clasped tightly, the veins along his temples raised and blue. He did not look up when she spoke. "Baron," she said softly, "those things in the music room, they were your family." He nodded slowly. "What remains of them? Each generation of Blackwoods carries the mark. Each generation fails to unmake it. They are the residue of those failures." She stepped closer. "You said there was a ritual, one that could end it." Heinrich raised his head, eyes hollow behind the dark lenses. "There is a ritual, yes, but it was never completed. The Liber Obscura only hints at it. Elias attempted it first in 1798. He believed the blood could be divided, one vessel bound to the living, the other sacrificed to the dark. It required a witness, pure of heart, untouched by the mark." Clara's stomach turned. "And his witness?" He smiled faintly, without mirth. "His wife." She shivered. "The woman in the chapel." "The same," he said. He misread the final line. Instead of dividing the curse, he multiplied it. She became its root, and he its echo. Since then, the shadow has lived through both halves of the line. Every Blackwood born is bound to her. Clara's eyes drifted to the shelves lining the walls. Between the books stood relics, rosaries, iron nails, fragments of bone sealed in glass. "Why bring me here, then? What do I have to do with this?" The Baron rose, pacing slowly. "Because the blood cannot be ended by its own hand. It must be witnessed and judged by one who can bear the invocation without breaking. You were chosen the moment you read from the book." She shook her head. "I didn't choose this." "Neither did I," he said, voice low. "But choice is the illusion the shadow uses to feed. It waits for will to falter, then steps through." He stopped beside the window. The morning light was thin, almost colorless. "I have spent years tracing the rites of severance. The final phrase is said to exist only in one place, in the reflection of the vessel itself. That is why the mirror survives." Clara frowned. "You mean she knows the words?" He nodded. "She remembers what Elias began, and she wants it finished, but on her terms." The organ shuddered again above them, its notes rising unbidden. The Baron flinched. "It's waking her. Every note is a summons." "Then destroy it," Clara said sharply. "Burn the mirror, break the keys, end it." He looked at her, not angry, but tired, infinitely so. "Do you think I haven't tried?" The mirror reforms by morning. The organ plays without pipes. Every attempt to destroy the instruments of the curse only strengthens the bond. The house feeds on defiance. Clara stepped back, the realization crawling cold through her chest. "Then what can we do?" He turned toward her, his voice soft, almost pleading. "We finish what was begun. Tonight, beneath the chapel, we reopen the binding circle and speak the true invocation. If it works, the Blackwood line will finally die, and with it the shadow. And if it doesn't?" He smiled faintly. "Then you'll never wake to know it failed." Clara's breath caught. "You need me for this?" "Yes," he said. "You are the witness. The line must be ended by a voice untainted by the blood." "And you?" she asked quietly. "What happens to you if it succeeds?" His silence was answer enough. That night, the storm came. Wind clawed at the shutters, rain striking like gravel against the glass. The servants had all vanished, dismissed, or fled. Only the two of them remained in the great hollow house. They descended the staircase to the chapel together, their lanterns casting long, wavering shadows along the walls. The altar had been cleared. The floor, polished clean of dust, revealed a circle carved into the stone, ancient, precise, filled with sigils that pulsed faintly in the lantern light. In the center lay the mirror, unshrouded now, reflecting not their faces but a dim, endless void. Heinrich handed Clara a small dagger with an ornate hilt. "You must draw blood," he said. "Not much. Just enough to mark the seal." Clara took it, her hands trembling. "And then we speak," he said, stepping into the circle. "And we pray the shadow listens." The organ began to play again, no longer distant, but surrounding them, as though the air itself were made of sound. The walls quivered, dust falling from the rafters. The mirror rippled. Clara pressed the dagger to her palm and let a drop of blood fall onto the stone. It hissed upon contact, spreading through the sigils like ink in water. Heinrich began to chant in Latin, the same language that filled the pages of Liber Obscura. His voice was low at first, then stronger, resonating with the house itself. The mirror darkened, and in its surface the woman appeared again, her face no longer hollow, but almost human. Her lips moved in time with the Baron's chant, completing his words as though she had been waiting for them all along. Then her gaze shifted to Clara. "You are the final key," the voice said, not aloud, but inside her skull. "Speak my name." Clara staggered, clutching her head. The words pressed against her mind, filling her mouth like water. I don't know your name." Heinrich broke his chant, shouting, "Do not answer her." But it was too late. The mirror flared white. The reflection of the chapel dissolved, replaced by an endless plane of shadow. In that void, hundreds of figures stood, each one bearing the Blackwood crest, each whispering her name. The Baron's voice cracked through the roar. "Clara, look away." She tried, but the mirror's pull was too strong. She saw within it the whole of the family line, bound together by one unending chain of faces, each bleeding into the next. And at the center, the woman, the first vessel, smiled through centuries of grief. Then the glass shattered. Darkness poured outward like smoke, swallowing the light of the lanterns. Heinrich's scream echoed through it, short and sharp, before being cut off. Clara fell to the floor, her hands pressed to her ears, as the air filled with the sound of 1,000 voices, pleading, singing, remembering. And then, silence. Only the rain remained, tapping against the ruined windows like fingertips against a coffin lid. When Clara looked up, the mirror was gone, and the Baron was nowhere to be seen. The storm had passed by morning, leaving a bruised sky over the valley. Blackwood Hall was utterly still. The silence was so deep that Clara could hear the crackling of her own heartbeat. She wandered the halls in a daze, calling the Baron's name, but no answer came. The servants' quarters were empty, their beds unmade, their lamps burned to pools of wax. In the corridor outside the library, the scent of iron lingered faintly, like blood left too long to dry. When she entered the Baron's study, the air felt wrong. The curtains had been torn from their rods, papers scattered across the floor. The desk where Heinrich had sat the night before was overturned, and in the center of the room lay the shattered remnants of his dark spectacles. Clara knelt beside them. The glass lenses were cracked inward, as though they had been crushed by invisible hands. Beneath them, drawn into the dust of the floorboards, was a symbol, the same circle that had glowed in the chapel, only now complete. Within the circle was a single word, scrawled in a trembling hand. "Finished." She stared at it, unsure whether to feel relief or dread. Outside, the forest stood motionless beneath a dull grey light. For a brief, impossible moment, the house seemed empty of its weight, as though a breath long held had finally been released. Then, from the fireplace, came a faint clicking sound. She turned. Something moved within the ashes, not flame, but movement, deliberate and careful. As she watched, a small black shape emerged, a beetle, its shell glossy as oil. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the hearth was alive with them, hundreds spilling out in silence, crawling across the floor, forming a slow-moving trail toward the doorway. Clara stumbled back. Her breath came fast and shallow. The insects passed her feet without harm, their movement unbroken, as though following a path she could not see. They were heading toward the west wing, toward the chapel. She followed them, though every instinct screamed against it. The corridors seemed darker now, the air heavy with the same scent of myrrh that had haunted her first night. When she reached the chapel doors, they were already open. Inside, the circle was gone. The altar had cracked clean down the middle, and through the fissure, faint blue light pulsed from below. The mirror's frame lay on the ground, empty, its glass dissolved into dust. The sound of dripping water echoed through the chamber, steady, rhythmic. Clara stepped closer. The floor beneath the altar had opened again, revealing the stairway to the depths. From below came a single voice, familiar and calm. Dr. Weiss. Her pulse quickened. Baron. A figure emerged from the stairwell, carrying a lantern. The light fell across his face, pale, calm, and wrong. His eyes, once hidden behind the dark lenses, now gleamed faintly with an otherworldly sheen. He smiled gently. "You should not be here." "What happened last night?" she asked. "Where did you go?" He glanced down at his hands. They were clean, too clean. "I went where the blood was waiting. The shadow has been given form. The house is free." But his voice was strange, layered, a whisper beneath a whisper. Clara took a step back. "You're not him." He tilted his head, almost kindly. "I am what remains of him." The blood and the vessel joined, as it was always meant to be. Elias's mistake has been corrected. She could see now, in the faint blue light, the pattern of veins beneath his skin, dark, branching like ink through water. "You said you wanted to end it," she whispered. "I did," he said. "And I have. The Blackwood name will not continue." His smile widened, serene and terrible. "It will endure." Behind him, the shadows along the wall rippled, taking on faint human forms. The ancestors, hundreds of them, stood watching in silence, their faces calm now, untroubled. Clara backed away toward the door. "If the shadow has you," she said, "then it's not finished." He stepped forward, lantern trembling in his hand. "It is finished. The line is bound in one vessel, one soul. It cannot spread." The lantern light flickered, and for a split second she saw two faces overlap, the Baron's and the woman's, merged, seamless. Then the flame went out. The chapel plunged into darkness. Clara ran. Through the corridors, past the empty rooms, her footsteps echoing like screams against the silence. She didn't stop until she reached the front gates. When she wrenched them open, the morning air hit her like ice. The fog had lifted completely. The valley below glimmered under a pale sun. But as she turned back toward the house, she saw every window filled with faces, watching her, still and quiet, each one wearing the same faint smile. And in the highest window of the west wing, a silhouette stood behind the glass, tall, slender, holding a lantern that burned with a blue, unholy flame. Clara fled down the winding path that led from the gates, the cold air cutting her throat. The forest pressed close on both sides, silent, heavy, as if it too were listening. She did not look back until she reached the road that wound toward the village. Only then did she stop. Blackwood Hall stood in the distance, perfectly still. No smoke rose from its chimneys, no light flickered in its windows. For the first time since her arrival, it looked abandoned, an empty carcass of stone. And yet, faintly, she could still hear the organ. The notes were slow, almost tender, drifting through the air like a lullaby played for no one. She made her way to Hallstatt before dusk. The villagers turned from her as she passed, some crossing themselves, others bolting their doors. When she reached the inn, the keeper refused to meet her eyes. "You came from the Blackwood estate," he said. "It wasn't a question." "I did," Clara answered. "The Baron is gone." The innkeeper's wife made a sign against evil. "Then it's begun again." Clara's voice shook. "What do you mean?" The man leaned closer. "Every generation, someone says it's finished. Every generation, someone comes down from that hill, and within the year, the forest grows darker. The river runs black. The bells toll though no one rings them." He nodded toward her hand. "And those who carry the mark don't live long." She looked down. A thin scar had formed where the dagger had cut her palm, dark and faintly shimmering beneath the skin. When she rubbed it, she felt warmth, a pulse that was not entirely hers. That night, she tried to rest. The innkeeper's wife brought her bread and broth, whispering prayers as she set the tray down. Clara lay awake for hours, listening to the wind claw at the shutters. Then she heard it. Soft at first, the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, a man's tread. She rose, heart pounding, and opened the door. The corridor was empty, lit only by a dying lamp, but the air smelled faintly of myrrh and candle smoke. When she turned back toward her bed, she froze. The lantern sat on the table, the same one the Baron had carried in the chapel. Its glass burned with a dull blue flame. A voice came from nowhere and everywhere at once. "You bore witness. The bond is sealed." Clara backed toward the wall. "No," she whispered. "You said the line was ended. It is. Through you." The light grew brighter, bleeding into the walls, the floor, her skin. The scar on her palm began to throb, the veins of her wrist darkening like ink spreading through parchment. Her reflection in the window blurred, her features flickering, her own face, then the woman's, then both. She gasped, clutching her hand. "What do you want from me?" "Not want. Become." The lantern shattered. Blue fire rushed outward, swallowing the room in silence. When it cleared, the window pane was cracked from corner to corner, and the bed was empty. Only the faint scent of roses lingered in the air. By morning, the villagers found the inn door open, the sheets of one room still warm. The only trace of the guest was a single dark imprint upon the floorboards, the shape of a bare foot half-formed, facing the road back toward the forest. That night, the organ began to play again in the distance, and in the highest window of Blackwood Hall, two silhouettes now stood side by side. Weeks passed before anyone dared approach Blackwood Hall again. The villagers told stories in the taverns, of strange lights flickering above the woods, of whispers carried down-river, of dreams in which the dead called them by name. But the house itself stood silent, unvisited, as it had for a century at a time, until the letter arrived. It came by post to the Hallstatt rectory, addressed in delicate handwriting to Father Lucas Reinhardt. The envelope bore no seal, only a faint watermark in the shape of an inverted cross. Inside was a single sheet of parchment, written in English. To the custodian of the parish of Hallstatt, by right of inheritance and by the witness of blood, the estate known as Blackwood Hall shall be opened anew. The lineage continues. Signed, Dr. Clara Weiss, Blackwood. Father Lucas read the name 3 times before he understood it. Then he crossed himself and burned the letter in the rectory stove. But even as the flames consumed it, the ink refused to fade. The words burned white, like bone. 3 nights later, he dreamt of the river that ran beneath the forest. In the dream, the water was red, and from it rose 2 figures, hand in hand, eyes like mirrors reflecting nothing but light. Clara awoke in a bed that was not her own. The room smelled of beeswax and cedar. The windows were draped in heavy curtains, and beyond them came the distant hum of the organ. Her throat was dry, her pulse steady, though her last memory was of fire and silence. She sat up slowly. Someone had changed her clothes. She wore a long black gown, the fabric soft and unfamiliar. On her left hand, the faint scar glowed beneath the skin, pulsing in rhythm with the music above. She rose and opened the door. The corridor was bright, freshly swept. Portraits of the Blackwood family lined the walls, but these were new, painted in the span of a few weeks. At the end of the hallway hung the largest of them all, Baron Heinrich Blackwood and Clara Weiss, standing together before the chapel, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She stared at it in disbelief. The faces were perfect, lifelike, almost breathing. Beneath the frame, a brass plate read, "The Union, 1902. Clara touched the plate. It was warm. "Do you approve?" said a voice behind her. She turned. The Baron stood in the doorway, dressed in the same coat he had worn the night of the ritual. His eyes, uncovered, gleamed faintly blue, but his smile was calm, human, almost tender. "You're alive," she said. "So are you," he answered. "More than ever before." She shook her head. "What happened to me?" "You fulfilled the rite," he said simply. "The vessel and the witness must merge for the blood to be contained. Elias's mistake was separation. We corrected it." She stepped back, horror blooming beneath her ribs. "You bound me to it." He reached toward her, and though she wanted to recoil, her body did not move. His touch was cold and steady. "No, Clara, you bound us together. The shadow cannot live without flesh, and flesh cannot survive without shadow. We are what remains of both." She pulled free, breath trembling. "I want no part of this." "You already are part of it," he said. "You feel it, don't you? The house no longer cries. The river runs clear. The curse is contained, and yet it breathes, through us. The line will not spread beyond these walls. And when we die—" He smiled faintly. "Do you still believe in death?" That evening, as twilight bled into the forest, Clara wandered the estate. The servants had returned, or rather, reflections of them. Their faces were familiar, their gestures perfect, yet their eyes held the faint opacity of glass. They bowed as she passed, murmuring, "My lady." The chapel stood open. The mirror had been restored, whole once more, gleaming like a black lake beneath the moonlight. When she approached it, her reflection moved a heartbeat too late. "Is this what I've become?" she whispered. From the glass, her other self smiled. "It's what you've always been." The reflection turned its head, though she had not. Behind it, in the mirror's world, the Baron stood watching. His eyes shone like stars under water. "Do you see now, Clara?" he said. "We are the end of the curse, and the beginning of remembrance." Her hand lifted of its own accord, palm pressing against the cold surface. Beneath her skin, the scar flared like molten metal. For a moment, she saw visions cascade through the mirror's depth. The monastery from which the stones were taken, Elias's trembling hands over the grimoire, the woman who had first spoken the forbidden name. The centuries folded like paper. Every Blackwood who had lived, everyone who had died, now lived again through her, through them. and beneath the vision, a whisper wound through her mind. "The blood does not end. It learns." She gasped, pulling her hand away. The reflection lingered a moment longer before fading. The chapel fell silent. In the weeks that followed, the valley changed. The villagers spoke of seeing a pale woman walking the edge of the woods at dusk, her gown trailing mist. The river that had run black for generations turned clear as glass. Crops grew again in fields long barren. But they also whispered that at night, the sound of the organ carried farther than before. Sometimes, in the stillness before dawn, one could hear voices, a duet, male and female, singing in a language no one knew. Father Lucas, unable to sleep, climbed the church tower one morning and looked toward the estate. In the first light of day, he saw smoke rising from the chapel, not black, but blue, curling upward in thin spirals. And though the wind was still, he heard faint laughter drifting down the valley. He returned to his chambers and began to write an entry in the parish record. His hand trembled. The curse of the Blackwoods is said to be lifted, yet the shadow lingers. Perhaps salvation and damnation are one and the same. Perhaps the house does not curse its blood, but remembers it. He stopped writing when he noticed the ink, shimmering faintly, blue as the morning smoke. Far above the valley, inside Blackwood Hall, Clara stood by the window. The Baron joined her, his reflection already waiting in the glass. She watched the sun climb over the mountains, its light spilling across the forest. "Will they ever know the truth?" she asked. He shook his head. "Truth is only the shadow of belief. Let them think it ended. And us," she said quietly. He turned to her, his eyes soft. "We are the echo, the memory bound in stone." He reached for her hand. Their fingers intertwined, the pulse beneath their skin perfectly synchronized. For a moment, the house seemed to sigh, content, almost peaceful. Then, from deep within the walls, the faintest sound stirred again, a single heartbeat, not theirs. Clara froze. "Do you hear that?" Heinrich's smile faltered. "It cannot be." But it was. Somewhere below, in the cold earth beneath the chapel, something new had begun to move. The mirror, still and forgotten on its altar, rippled once more. In its depths, a small shape stirred, the shape of an infant's hand pressing against the glass from within. And the whisper came again, softer than ever. "The blood remembers." The snows came early that year. By mid-November, the mountains above Holstadt lay buried beneath a white silence that muffled even the church bells. The villagers spoke little of the estate on the hill now. It had been nearly 6 months since anyone had seen light in its windows, and though hunters swore the chimney still smoked some nights, no one went near enough to know. Father Lucas aged visibly in those months. He kept to his parish house, writing often and sleeping rarely. Every evening he heard the faintest sound from the forest, not wind, not wolves, but the low throb of a single organ note, held endlessly, as though the mountain itself were breathing through pipes of stone. And always, after the sound faded, came a child's laughter. On the final night of December, he decided to go up. He packed a lantern, a small cross, and his worn prayer book, and began the climb before dawn. The forest received him in absolute silence. Even the snow seemed reluctant to crunch beneath his boots. When he reached the gates of Blackwood Hall, they stood open, the iron slick with frost. Inside, the house had changed. Where once the air reeked of dust and decay, now it smelled faintly of lavender and ink. Candles burned in every sconce. Portraits hung straight and polished. In the entrance hall, a fire crackled merrily, and at the base of the grand staircase stood Clara. She wore the same black gown, her hair bound with a silver ribbon. Her eyes, though still her own, carried that faint, unnatural light Father Lucas had feared to see again. In her arms she held a child, pale, silent, wrapped in a blanket the color of storm clouds. "Father," she said softly, as if greeting an expected guest, "you shouldn't have come." He stared at her, his breath visible in the chill. "I dreamt of you," he murmured. "And of him." Clara smiled faintly. "Then you know it cannot end." Her voice was calm, but beneath it he heard a second tone, lower, older, resonating like the organ's hidden pipes. The child shifted against her chest, opening eyes of impossible blue. Lucas stepped closer. "Whose is the child?" "Ours," she whispered. "His and mine." The house made flesh once more. She turned toward the staircase. "Would you like to see the chapel? It's been restored." He followed because he could not help it. The corridor was warm, and the air pulsed with a soft rhythm, as though every wall concealed a beating heart. When they reached the chapel doors, they opened soundlessly. The mirror had grown. It now covered the entire altar wall, a single sheet of living glass that reflected not their bodies but their thoughts, images shifting across its surface in slow, luminous ripples. Monks building the first monastery, a woman reading by candlelight, a baron kneeling in the dark. Clara placed the child on the altar. The mirror brightened. "He will not suffer," she said. "He will remember." "Clara, please," Father Lucas began, stepping forward. "Whatever this is, end it." She looked back at him, and for a heartbeat he saw every Blackwood who had ever lived move through her features. Elias, Heinrich, the nameless bride, even the unborn that had never drawn breath. All of them looking out through one gaze. "It isn't a curse," she said. "It's memory made flesh. Do you call remembrance evil?" He raised the cross. "You speak with their tongues, not yours." "And yet," she said, "it is my voice you hear." The child reached upward. His tiny hand pressed to the mirror's surface, and where he touched it, light poured outward like blood reversed into the vein. The organ began again, not from above, but from within the walls, the floor, the air itself. 1,000 tones layered into one immense harmony that neither sanctified nor damned. The mirror rippled. Clara lifted her face to its glow. "Do you see?" she whispered. "The blood remembers, and so the house endures." Father Lucas felt his knees give way. The cross fell from his fingers, striking the stone with a sound like a closing door. "What will become of you?" he whispered. Clara turned, her eyes filled with tears that shone the same blue as the mirror. "We will sleep," she said, "and when the world forgets us, we will wake again." She gathered the child, pressed her lips to his brow, and stepped through the glass. It accepted her like water. The surface closed without a ripple. The organ fell silent. By morning, the snow had covered the path to the estate. Father Lucas was found days later at the chapel doors, half buried in frost, his hands folded around the cross. His eyes were open, reflecting only white. The villagers sealed the house again, stone by stone, and swore never to speak its name. Generations passed. Wars came and went. The Blackwood estate sank into ruin. But on certain nights, when the fog rolls down from the mountains, travellers still claim to hear faint music drifting through the trees. Not mournful, not joyful, simply vast. And sometimes, if one listens long enough, another sound joins it, the laughter of a child echoing through the snow. Inside the ruined chapel, the mirror remains intact. Its surface, dulled by dust, hides a faint shape beneath the glass, a woman holding a child, both watching patiently through centuries of reflection. And if a beam of moonlight catches it just right, the glass seems to breathe, pulsing softly with the rhythm of a heart that never stopped. The blood remembers. The mirror stands unbroken. The valley forgets. But memory, Memory never dies. This has been the tale of the Blackwood family. You've been watching Eternal Obsidian, where the forgotten still speak. Stay with us. The next secret is already stirring.